Maggie Collins wasn't dressed like someone about to drop $250,000 on a car. Her jeans were comfortable, not couture. Her white t-shirt, clean but ordinary. Her sneakers, well-worn, well-loved, but far from designer. To the world outside, she looked like any woman running errands on a Tuesday morning. But Maggie wasn't just any woman. She had walked through fire for the life she now lived. A decade of long nights building her nonprofit from scratch. 1,000 tears shed over children with disabilities and the families who felt forgotten. The Collins Foundation had become a lifeline for thousands. Maggie didn't just build an organization, she built hope. And though she was now married to one of the most powerful tech minds in the country, she never stopped choosing simplicity. Not because she had to, but because it reminded her of what mattered. That's not what Blake Thompson saw. To Blake, the smug manager of Boston Luxury Motors, Maggie was a time waster, the kind of woman who walked in off the street, dreamed with her eyes and left empty-handed. His gaze scanned her outfit like a scanner searching for creditworthiness. He didn't find it. "I'm sorry," Blake said, stepping between Maggie and the car she had pointed at, a midnight blue Azure Coupe limited edition. "But I think you're in the wrong place." He gestured politely toward the exit, like he was doing her a favor. A few of his colleagues chuckled. Customers stared. Maggie felt a flash of heat rise to her face, but she didn't flinch. She didn't storm out. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, thanked the young man named Daniel who had tried to help her, and walked out the same way she came in, quietly. But what Blake didn't know, and what no one else in that showroom could have guessed, was that Maggie Collins wasn't just any woman. She was a woman with options. The next morning they would all find out just how wrong they had been, because when the black-gloved chauffeur stepped out of the $1.2 million Rolls-Royce Phantom and opened the rear door, the dealership would freeze. When Alexander Collins, the billionaire, the innovator, the man whose companies built half the energy grid of the future, stepped onto the marble floor with a calm, clipped voice and a name that could buy the building, they stood in, the truth would become impossible to ignore. But before all that came something more important. A lesson, a shift, a reckoning, because Maggie hadn't come to make a scene. She came to make a point, and the most dangerous person in any room is the one you dismiss too quickly. The morning sun glinted off polished metal as Maggie Collins stepped through the doors of Boston Luxury Motors, her ponytail bouncing softly with each stride. Inside, the dealership gleamed like a jewelry box. Every surface reflected opulence, marble, floors, glass partitions, leather-bound sales desks. It was a shrine to status, and Maggie knew the rules. Appearance was everything, but she wasn't here to impress. She was here on a mission. A few weeks earlier, Maggie's sister Caroline had rung the bell after her final round of chemotherapy. Breast cancer had taken its toll, on her health, on her spirit, and on her sense of possibility. So today, Maggie wasn't just shopping for a car. She was preparing to deliver a dream, a gesture that said, "You made it, and you deserve beauty." Her eyes immediately found it. A midnight blue Azure Coupe, sleek as a predator, sat atop an elevated platform near the center of the showroom. Its paint seemed to shift between navy and ink, depending on how the light caught it. It was elegance in motion, even at rest. She barely had time to admire it before a voice intercepted her. "Good morning. Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. I'm Daniel," said a young salesman with earnest eyes and a slightly oversized suit. His tone was warm, hopeful, the kind of voice that still believed everyone deserved respect. Maggie smiled. "Nice to meet you, Daniel. I'm interested in that coupe over there, for my sister's 40th birthday." Daniel blinked, momentarily surprised, but quickly regained his composure. "That's an excellent choice," he said. "Limited edition Azure, only 15 made this year." Before he could say more, another voice sliced through the air. "Also, take it from here, Daniel." Blake Thompson entered the conversation like a spotlight, polished, tall, eyes cold with calculation. Sales manager, gatekeeper, judge, jury, executioner. He turned to Maggie, smiling tightly. "Looking for directions, ma'am?" There was a pause, a split second where his words dangled in the air, awkward and patronizing. Daniel stepped back slightly, visibly uneasy. Maggie replied evenly, "No, I'd like to learn more about the Azure Coupe." Blake glanced at her sneakers, then her jeans, then her t-shirt. His smile didn't waver, but the chill behind it deepened. "That vehicle starts at $285,000, he said, each syllable soaked in condescension. "Perhaps I can direct you to our pre-owned division. It's just a few blocks east." Maggie didn't respond immediately. She'd heard this tone before, too many times. People who confused wealth with wardrobe. Who thought humility meant inferiority? "I'd like to see the interior, if possible," she said calmly. Blake stiffened. "That model is by appointment only," he lied. "We typically schedule private viewings for serious clients." At that moment, a couple entered, draped in designer labels, perfume trailing behind them like royalty. Instantly, Blake transformed. His posture straightened, his voice brightened. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington." "What a pleasure," he beamed, leaving Maggie mid-sentence. "Let me show you something very special." Maggie stood silently as he led, the couple toward the very car she had asked about. He opened the driver's door for Mrs. Harrington with theatrical flair, allowing her to slide into the supple leather seat. Daniel reappeared beside Maggie, shame written across his face. "I'm really sorry," he whispered. "Would you still like to hear about the Azure?" "I would," Maggie replied with a quiet smile. Daniel launched into an explanation of the specs. V12 engine, handcrafted interior, custom trim. But his voice wavered as he watched Blake continue his performance with the Harringtons. Across the room, Blake bragged about custom color options and exclusive availability. "Most people wait 8 months for a chance to test drive one of these," he declared. Maggie walked slowly across the floor, approaching the group just as Blake finished his pitch. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I'm still interested in purchasing this model." Blake's jaw tightened. "As I mentioned earlier," he snapped, "this vehicle is currently being shown. If you'd like to schedule a visit, please contact our front desk." "I'd like to buy it today," Maggie said evenly. "As a birthday gift. I'm prepared to pay in cash." That was the breaking point. Blake laughed, a sharp, bitter bark that echoed across the showroom. Every eye turned toward them. "A cash purchase, really?" His voice rose with each word. "This isn't a garage sale. That car costs more than most houses. People who can afford it don't dress like that." He motioned to her outfit like it was a disease. Maggie felt her cheeks burn, but not from shame, from fury. Not for herself, but for every person who'd ever been belittled because someone didn't see past their clothes, their accent, their story. "I believe my money is as good as anyone's," she said quietly. Blake stepped in close, voice low but laced with disdain. "You're wasting my time and embarrassing yourself," he said. "Either make an appointment, dressed appropriately, or leave." A hush fell across the room. Customers froze. Employees held their breath. And then, another voice broke the silence. "Is there a problem here?" It was Richard Mason, the dealership's owner. Mid-50s, well-groomed, confident. He had caught the end of the exchange. Blake smoothed his tie. "No issue, sir. Just explaining to this woman that we operate by appointment." Maggie turned toward the owner. "Margaret Collins." She introduced herself. "I understand your policies. Your sales manager made them abundantly clear." Richard gave a tight, uncertain smile. "Our clientele typically understand exclusivity," he said. Maggie didn't blink. "So I've gathered." Blake moved closer again. "If you're genuinely interested, which I doubt, you can call ahead. Next time, maybe bring proof of funds and a different outfit." Behind her, someone snickered. Maggie scanned the room, the judgment in their eyes, the casual cruelty, the quiet approval of a broken system. And then, with a grace-born nod of wealth but of lived truth, she nodded. "I see." She turned, walked slowly toward the exit. But just before the doors closed behind her, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen. No raised voice, no final insult, just one quiet call. And tomorrow, they'd all understand exactly who she was. The late morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows of the Collins estate, a quiet, architectural masterpiece nestled on 5 acres just outside Boston. The home, much like its owners, wore its wealth subtly, elegant, deliberate, and silent on its power. Maggie Collins stepped inside, her sneakers brushing over imported hardwood, her expression unreadable. Alexander Collins looked up from his desk, immediately rising when he saw the tightness in her eyes. 15 years of marriage had taught him to recognize that look. Not sadness, not defeat, something colder. Humiliation. She sat, the weight of the morning finally pressing into her spine. It was educational, she said with a smile that barely held. Alexander said nothing. He simply waited. And so she told him. About the stairs, the laughter, the way Blake Thompson had waved her off like a child wandering into an adults-only showroom. She told him about the lie, appointment only, and the way he paraded other customers past her to the very car she had asked to see. When she reached the part about the cash purchase insult, Alexander's jaw clenched, not from the implication of poverty, but from the sheer arrogance of it. Maggie's voice lowered. "It's not about me," she said. "I could have walked out of there, ordered that car with a click, and never looked back. But what about the people who can't, who are told they don't belong simply because of how they look?" Alexander nodded slowly. "And the young salesman, Daniel?" She smiled faintly. "Kind, a little nervous, but decent. He treated me with respect even when his manager was mocking me 2 feet away." He stepped closer, his tone quiet but razor sharp. "What would you like to do?" "For Caroline's birthday, I'll get the car," she said. "But for that showroom, I don't want revenge. I want clarity. I want them to see who they dismissed." A slow grin tugged at Alexander's mouth. "I think I can work with that." That night after dinner, Alexander Collins made 5 phone calls, none of them long, all of them purposeful. Tomorrow, Boston Luxury Motors would learn the cost of arrogance and the value of a second look. The next morning, the dealership bustled with its usual rhythm. Blake Thompson adjusted his signature blue tie in the showroom's mirrored wall, still chuckling about yesterday's undercover shopper. A woman in jeans thinking she could buy a $250,000 coupe? It was laughable. He made a mental note to bring it up at lunch with the Harringtons. Time is money, he had reminded the team that morning. We don't entertain fantasy. At exactly 10:17 a.m., fantasy became reality. A deep, velvety purr rolled through the parking lot, a sound that turned heads before the vehicle even appeared. Through the front glass, every eye watched as a bespoke Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight blue and mirror smooth, glided to a stop in front of the main entrance. It was the kind of car that didn't pull up. It arrived. A white-gloved chauffeur stepped. Duris rounded the car and opened the back door with precision. The man who emerged wasn't flashy. He didn't need to be. Tall, tailored charcoal suit, salt and pepper hair styled neatly. A presence that pulled gravity toward him. Blake's instinct kicked in. Big fish. He darted forward, adjusting his tie once again. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. Blake Thompson, sales manager, an absolute pleasure." The man offered a polite but reserved smile. "Alexander Collins," he said simply, shaking Blake's hand. Blake blinked. The name danced on the edge of familiarity, and the roles spoke volumes. "Mr. Collins, it's truly an honor. What brings you in today? We've just received a—" "I'm here for a specific car," Alexander interrupted. "The Azure Coupe, midnight blue." Blake's eyebrows lifted in delight. "Excellent taste, one of 15 in the country. If you'd like to follow me—" "I know where it is," Alexander said flatly. "My wife was here yesterday." "Interested?" "In purchasing it." There was a beat of silence, then another. "Your wife?" Blake's smile twitched. "Perhaps one of my associates assisted her." "No, Mr. Thompson," Alexander cut in. his voice now cool steel. You did, or rather, you refused to. The color drained from Blake's face. He opened his mouth, closed it. She was wearing jeans, Alexander continued. White t-shirt, scuffed sneakers. And you dismissed her. Suggested she walk to another building to see used cars. Remember now? In the periphery, Daniel stopped what he was doing. Customers stilled, a hush spread like fog. I had no idea that was your wife, Blake stammered. There must have been some misunderstanding. Daniel stepped forward, heart racing. It wasn't a misunderstanding, he said, louder than he thought he could. Miss Collins was polite, clear. She asked about the Azure multiple times. Daniel motioned to Blake, kept brushing her off. Alexander turned to him, his expression softening just slightly. Thank you, Daniel. At that moment, Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, appeared. What's going on here? Alexander turned to him calmly. Mr. Mason, I presume? Yes, Richard Mason. Welcome to Boston Luxury. I'm not here for a welcome. I'm here to inform you that your sales manager publicly humiliated my wife, Margaret Collins, based solely on her appearance. Mason froze. Alexander's voice dropped. Margaret Collins, founder of the Collins Foundation, raised over $50 million for children with disabilities. She lives modestly, not because she has to, but because she believes in walking beside those she serves. He let the words settle like stone. She walked into this dealership ready to spend $285,000, and your manager laughed in her face. Mason's jaw tightened. I had no idea. Miss Collins, I was there briefly. I didn't realize. But you saw enough to stay silent, Alexander said sharply. So let me ask, if she had walked in wearing a designer dress and diamond heels, would you have stopped it then? The room fell silent. Alexander continued, measured. I came here today because I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. But now I see it's not just Blake, it's a culture problem, one that needs fixing. Richard Mason swallowed. Mr. Collins, what can we do? Alexander looked around the room. I'm not just here to buy the car anymore. I'm here to ask, what are you willing to learn? He turned to Blake. And how far are you willing to fall to understand the weight of a single glance? The air inside Boston Luxury Motors had gone cold. Not from the temperature, but from realization. The very foundation of arrogance that had propped up Blake Thompson's confidence for years had just cracked. And Alexander Collins stood calmly, in the center of it all, firm, composed, unflinching. Alexander let the silence linger before he finally spoke again, voice steady and deliberate. My wife doesn't care for appearances, he said, turning back toward the staff who had gathered. Like stunned spectators, she believes in purpose, in using her success to elevate others. The Collins Foundation isn't just a name, it's an engine. One that has provided medical equipment, adaptive sports programs, specialized education for children who might otherwise be forgotten. He let that sink in, then added, Maggie dresses the way she does because she never wants to forget what struggle looks like, and she never wants others to forget it either. Blake stood rigid, his tie suddenly suffocating. Each word was like a hammer driving home how deeply he had misjudged her. Alexander's voice sharpened. When your business model depends on scanning shoes before listening to needs, you stop selling cars, you start selling superiority. He turned to Richard Mason. I came here with the intention of purchasing the Azure coupe for my sister-in-law, as Maggie wanted. But I was also considering replacing our company's fleet, 7 high-end executive vehicles, and potentially adding new personal acquisitions. Richard's eyes widened. A deal of that magnitude would not just break records, it would make the dealership's year. Alexander paused. But now, I'm reconsidering. A hush fell again. I don't reward disrespect, he said, his gaze flicking back to Blake. But I do believe in redemption. Blake's throat tightened. So here's what I propose. Alexander continued. I'll purchase the Azure through Daniel. He turned toward the young salesman who looked genuinely stunned. You were the only person in this building who treated my wife with dignity. I want you to handle the sale, and I want you to be trained as lead client liaison moving forward." Daniel nodded, stunned. "Yes, sir. I'd be honored." Alexander then turned back to Blake. "As for you," he said, his tone now lower, quieter, but no less sharp. "You're not being fired." Blake's eyebrows raised slightly. "Hope? You're being invited," Alexander said, "to learn." Blake blinked. "Sir, the Collins Foundation is holding a benefit gala next month," Alexander explained. "You will be there, not as a guest, not as a VIP, but as a volunteer." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Collins, that's not exactly—" "It's exactly what it needs to be," Alexander said flatly. "He'll help set up, assist the children, stay until the last chair is folded. I want him to understand what humility feels like. Because if this dealership wants the Collins fleet business, it won't just be about numbers. It'll be about values." His eyes locked onto Blake's. "This isn't about punishment. It's about perspective." Blake swallowed. Hard. "I'll do it," he said quietly. Alexander nodded once. "Good. Let's see what you do with the opportunity." A month later, the Grand Boston Hotel pulsed with warmth and laughter. The ballroom had been transformed into something more than elegant. It was alive. Children in wheelchairs zoomed down ramps decorated like racetracks. Families gathered around interactive exhibits. Medical staff mingled with donors, and laughter echoed louder than any speech. India. The middle of it all stood Blake Thompson, but not in a suit. Not with his perfect hair and polished tone. No, tonight he wore the same event t-shirt as every other volunteer. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands pushing a wheelchair for a boy named Thomas. It had started as penance, but now it felt like purpose. "Mr. Blake," Thomas said, beaming. "You're gonna lose again in basketball later." Blake grinned. "I probably will, champ, but I'm getting better, slowly." Across the room, Maggie Collins watched them from a distance. Her dress was elegant but understated, her presence glowing quietly among the guests. She approached Blake. With a soft smile, "You're getting good with that chair," she said gently. He turned, surprised, and then composed himself. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "thank you for speaking to me tonight, and for allowing me to be here." Maggie tilted her head. "How has it been?" Blake looked around the room. "Humbling," he admitted, "and necessary." He hesitated. "I need to say this to you. Directly. I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse. I made assumptions, I made judgments, I failed." She studied him, her silence heavy, but not cruel. "I accept your apology," she said. "But only if you remember this moment every time someone walks into your showroom looking like they don't belong." Blake nodded. "I will. I already have." At that moment, Alexander joined them, placing a reassuring hand on Maggie's shoulder. He looked at Blake, then at the crowd of children behind him. "I hear Thomas likes you," Alexander said. Blake smiled. "He's a better coach than I deserve," Alexander chuckled. "He's honest, that's for sure." Then, casually, almost as an afterthought, Alexander added, "You know, that corporate fleet I mentioned." Blake froze. "We're still in the market," Alexander continued. "And Daniel tells me you've been mentoring him. That's a start." Blake's eyes widened. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Alexander said. "Just keep showing up. Be better. Earn it." A lump rose in Blake's throat, but he kept it together. "I will, sir. Thank you." As the night wound down, Blake found himself helping Thomas adjust his new adaptive basketball glove, donated by the Collins Foundation. "You're cool," Thomas said simply. "Even if you used to be, you know, a little grumpy." Blake laughed. "That's fair, buddy." Across the room, Maggie whispered something to Alexander. He smiled, and for the first time in his life, Blake Thompson understood. True wealth doesn't walk into a dealership wearing a designer suit. It walks in quietly, dressed in jeans, and it leaves behind something far more valuable than a sale. It leaves behind a lesson. The Collins Foundation Gala was winding down. but the warmth inside the ballroom still pulsed like a quiet heartbeat. Laughter echoed from a nearby table where kids gathered for one last round of adaptive games. Volunteers carried boxes of giveaways, and event lights dimmed to a soft golden hue. In the center of it all was Blake Thompson, no longer the man with the pressed tie and sharper tongue. He crouched beside a boy in a wheelchair, adjusting the Velcro on the child's adaptive glove. "You're all set, Thomas," he said, securing the last strap. Thomas gave him a thumbs up, face beaming. "Thanks, Mr. Blake, you're better at this now." Blake smiled genuinely. "You made me better, champ." The words weren't flattery, they were a quiet truth. Because somewhere between scooping gift bags and learning the rules of adaptive basketball, Blake had finally understood something that years in luxury sales had never taught him. Kindness wasn't charity, and dignity didn't come with a price tag. Across the ballroom, Maggie stood with Alexander, watching, but not interrupting. She didn't need to. Blake wasn't performing. He wasn't making amends because of a deal or a contract or even guilt. He was becoming someone new. "Are you glad we didn't fire him?" Maggie asked softly. Alexander nodded. Not everyone would have taken the opportunity. But he did. Maggie's gaze lingered on Blake, helping another child reach for a toy at the raffle table. "The ones who change," she whispered, "are always the ones who were brave enough to look inward." Later that evening, as families packed up and volunteers cleaned, Blake found himself alone in a quiet corner of the ballroom. He sat on a folding chair, watching the last of the decorations come down. He didn't feel like a manager anymore. He felt human. He thought about that day, the day he'd laughed at a woman in jeans, dismissed her, judged her like a book without a cover, and how that woman turned out to be the wife of a billionaire, a woman who could have crushed him with a single word but chose instead to teach. It wasn't money that made Maggie Collins powerful. It was who she chose to be when no one was watching. Blake let out a slow breath. He'd sold millions in cars. But this was the first real investment he'd ever made in himself, and it had nothing to do with a commission. Narrator: we all make judgments. It's human. But sometimes the people we overlook, the ones we dismiss at a glance, are exactly the ones who hold the mirror up to who we truly are. And if we're lucky, we get the chance to change, not out of fear, but out of understanding, because respect isn't worn on your wrist or your shoes. Respect is earned, one choice at a time. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment about a time you were misjudged or learned to see someone differently. We've all been Blake at some point, but we can all become better.